Do you want to kill people with a mana rock? Because boy, do we have the deck for you. Howdy gamers, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG, and welcome to another Commander Deck Tech. Today, we're going to be looking at Felix Five-Boots. It is 2 and a Sultai for a 5/4 legendary creature, Ooze Rogue. It has Menace and Ward 2, along with if a creature you control dealing combat damage to a player causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Doubling effects are always fun, and always make fantastic commanders. Basically think of this deck as what Yarok does for enter the battlefield effects, Felix does for dealing combat damage effects. There is a bit of added complication with Felix, however, in that to get its doubling effect, we have to deal combat damage to a player. There's a ton of really cool effects that we can double up with Felix, but the issue is that a lot of the time, our opponents aren't going to play ball and will actively block our creatures. That means for a deals combat damage effect to get into this deck, it firstly either has to be on a creature with evasion, so it can reliably trigger itself, or it has to care about whenever any creature deals combat damage to a player, so that the other evasive creatures that we're running can trigger it. Honestly, this will just make the deck function so much better. It's much easier to run good evasive creatures than it is to run big, hulking, lumbering creatures that you then have to give evasion on top of that. The game plan of the deck will be pretty simple. Play some ramp, play some cool evasive creatures with cool and interesting deal combat damage effects, play our commander, double up those combat damage effects, and then profit. A quick note on how this video will work. We don't give full deck lists in this series, rather we give a full breakdown of each section that you need to make the deck work. In each section we give a bunch of different options for you to choose from. This way you can really make the deck your own. Any card we mention will be down in the description below. While you're there, please consider giving the video a like. The first section of the deck is our evasive creatures. These are creatures that will either have great damage dealing effects for us to trigger twice, or will trigger the deal damage effects of other creatures and permanents that we have. This is definitely a hefty section of the deck, and that's mainly because it 1 is what the deck really wants to do, and 2, a lot of the cards overlap with other sections of the deck as well. First up, we have some evasive creatures with either some card selection or card advantage when they deal combat damage to a player. You have cards like Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel, Cold-Eyed Selkie, and Shadowmage Infiltrator. They're just really solid options that help our deck draw some cards. Next up we have some creatures that give us card advantage, but this time from our opponent's decks. Thada, Adel, Acquisitor lets us steal an opponent's Soul Ring and Arcane Signet with our commander out, which is always going to be fun. Thief of Sanity gets the best cards from the top chunk of opponent's deck. Gríma and Dazzling Sphinx let us cast the top instant or sorcery from our opponent's libraries completely for free. And then Schema Thief is a nice way of making copies of the best artifacts in play. We then have some interaction on some evasive creatures. Glissa Sunslayer is basically unblockable, and then gives us a bunch of cool options to choose from. Trygon Predator is great at taking out some artifacts and enchantments. You then have Rankle, which is also a really flexible card with a bunch of great options to choose from, importantly including a repeatable edict. And then finally you have Bladegriff Prototype. This becomes a political monster when it's in play. When it connects, it's just going to answer what you need it to answer. And remember, all of these effects being doubled by our commander is just going to be really stupid. Talking of stupid, we have some top-end beef now, with 4 very big, very expensive, in both mana and money I will say, big dragons, with Old Gnawbone, Ancient Brass Dragon, Ancient Bronze Dragon, and Ancient Silver Dragon. These all have immense deal damage triggers that if they connect will give you so much value. Being honest, you probably only need one of these at the top end of the deck, but any of them will be great. Making a bunch of treasures, drawing a bunch of cards, whichever one you connect with is going to be awesome. Then lastly in this section we have a bunch of cheap evasive creatures. While these themselves don't have any deal damage effects, they will reliably trigger all of the other effects that trigger whenever any creature deals combat damage to an opponent. Honestly, they are just really solid with what the deck is doing. You either want them to be unblockable and 1 mana, or to be cheap and have some really good effect that the deck wants. For example, you have some protection with a card like Siren Stormtamer, or you can give our commander flying with a card like Wingcrafter, or even just drawing us a card and being the best blocker in the world with Baleful Strix. They're all solid options, they're all nice and cheap, definitely run these cards. Next up is our card draw section, and to me this is where the deck really shines, and is where we get rewarded for all those unblockable creatures. The bulk of this section is going to be on coastal piracy style of effects. These are effects that draw us a card whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, which obviously will then get doubled up with our commander out. There is a bunch of really great, really awesome effects in our colours, and if I was building this myself, I would personally run every one of them that you can. Because yes, if you have 2 of them out, they do stack. It's honestly fantastic. This is one of the strongest things that this deck can do, and is a main reason why we're running all of those evasive creatures that we previously mentioned. You then have a card like Kaito Shizuki, a very cool planeswalker that with our evasive creatures out is basically +1 draw a card every turn, which swiftly builds to an ultimate that then gets the best creatures out of our deck and into play. Next up is our ramp section, and like with most decks, we're looking for between 8 to 10 bits here. First up, as we're in green, we are going to run some rampant growth effects. Cards like Farseek, Nature's Law, and 3 Visits are definitely preferable here because they can go and get non-basic lands, which is great for our fixing. Outside of those, cards like Rampant Growth and Cultivate will still do great work, so they can also definitely get in. You then have your classic mana rocks. Apart from Sol Ring, we want them to have the possibility to tap for all of our colours, as we are a 3-colour deck, so that's where cards like Arcane Signet and Felwar Stone really shine. On top of those cards as a base, we have a card like Grim Hireling. This alone in the deck makes us 2 treasures whenever we deal combat damage to a player, but with our commander out, that's doubled to 4, which is honestly a lot of bonus mana for us to have every turn. You then have a card like One with Nature, which is really cool to stick on one of our evasive threats, so that we can swing through and get lands out of our deck and straight into play. Next up is our interaction section. This is here so we can stop our opponents from doing their own thing. I always like to start with at least 8 bits and then go up from there the more competitive that the playgroup is. First up, we need some instant speed interaction. Personally, I like to run at least 6 of these in a deck because just having ways of interacting with your opponents on their turns is invaluable. There's also so many good options in Sultai that you can really just run the best 6 that you have available to you. Mix it up a little, try and get cards that kill as many different things as possible. On top of those, I also then like to run 2 board wipes just to keep a game in check. Again, there's plenty of decent options in these colours, so run your favourites. We next have a little bit of recursion. This is only going to be a small section, and it's here to give our deck a little bit of redundancy, mainly in case anything important or cool gets removed by our opponents. There are generic good bits of recursion out there, but personally I really like Springleaf Avenger and Archpriest of Shadows. Ninjas are always cool, and the Avenger can bring back a permanent back to our hand when it connects. And then while the Archpriest doesn't have evasion itself, we can back up on a creature that does, to turn a flying man into an animate dead. Next up is a little bit of protection. We only need 2 to 4 bits here, and again it's to keep our plans in check and on the rails. First up we have some counterspells. These are primarily here to stop targeted removal and board wipes. We're in blue, we might as well take advantage of it. An Offer You Can't Refuse, Negate, and Fierce Guardianship are all fantastic options at a variety of budgets. You then also have a card like Heroic Intervention, which is great at protecting our whole board from an untimely board wipe. We then have a shoe zone's worth of boots to choose from for some added protection for our commander. What you run is up to you, but any of these will do a decent job of keeping the commander around. Okay, apart from Trailblazer's boots, I was just 1 short, but it is a good card. My personal favourite of these is Winged Boots, as it boosts that ward cost super high, while also giving our commander some bonus evasion so it can rumble in as well. The last section of our deck is our win cons. These are the cards that push a commanding board state into a win. First up, we have Drana Liberator of Malakir and Necropolis Regent. These both buff up our whole team when we deal combat damage. With our commander out, Drana will put 2 counters on each of our attacking creatures when it deals first strike damage, meaning yes, they are buffed for regular damage. And then the Regent will double and then double again all the power of our creatures that dealt combat damage in a turn. Honestly, these are both immense magic cards in this deck. We then have a nice little combination with Akima Stalking Shadow and Kazur Ruthless Stalker. The partner means that when we play one of them, they let us tutor for the other one, which is always going to be nice. Akima is a really solid evasive creature, and then Kazur is another great effect that allows our team to grow when they deal combat damage to a player. You then just have some solid green overrun effects. Cards like Beastmaster Ascension don't really synergize with the double damage of the deck, but they do kill our opponents, so are worth considering. We then have Quietus Spike, which is very funny in any deck with a bunch of evasive creatures. Stick it on one of them, and then when it connects with Felix in play, an opponent will lose half their life, and then half of that life again. While it won't straight take out a player, it will mean that next turn, they're basically dead. We then have a couple of beefy ninjas next, with Fallen Shinobi and Silent Blade Oni. Fallen Shinobi is great at stealing spells from our opponent's decks, and then the Silent Blade Oni lets us steal spells from our opponent's hands. We then have some awesome token makers that will get nicely doubled with Felix out. Tervigon can make an awesome board state of 1/1 Tyranny creature tokens when it connects, and then Giant Adderphage will make an army of 7/7s incredibly quickly, both really fun and really cool cards in the deck. And then lastly, we have Strixhaven Stadium. This is an awesome alternate win con in the deck. Normally it takes 10 hits with our creatures to make a player lose the game, but this also gets doubled up with our commander, meaning that with the Stadium in play, we only need to connect with 5 unblockable creatures to make a player lose the game. That is very attainable and very scary, and on top of that, it's also a mana rock. Absolutely love that. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, as we're 3 colours we honestly can't run too many, as mainly we will need our lands to do our fixing. The only colourless lands that I would consider running are Reliquary Tower and Command Beacon. The Tower lets us keep all the cards that we've drawn in our hand, and then Command Beacon is just really good in any deck that wants to have the commander around as much as possible. As importantly, it lets us dodge command attacks later in the game. For other lands we can run, I do love me a Creeping Tar Pit as just a bonus unblockable creature. As we're in black, you then obviously have Bojuka Bog as a nice way of just nerfing an opponent's graveyard. Right, that's going to do it for today. If you found this video helpful, if you're going to build this deck, please consider subscribing to the channel, would greatly help me out. The more of you who are subscribed, the cooler things we can do. Like for example, we've recently started Commander gameplay on the channel. Links to our most recent episode will be down in the description below as well. But until next time, it's goodbye from me, and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.